Hi, I'm Nick Reveles, the Geisel Director of Education and Outreach for San Diego Opera. I'm here today with Jonathan Lemalu from New Zealand, who is singing the role of Queequeg in Moby-Dick, one of the more eminent bass baritones in the world at the moment.
It's very nice of you to say.
Well, I took a look at your website, and my goodness, you've been singing everywhere and with everybody. Simon Rattle and Papano and Gergiev. This is a big name.
It's been a really great run. I think it's very much to do with studying and working in London, which is very much kind of a hotbed for those conductors.
Sure.
And so I suppose even like the American houses, you are maybe earmarked as a young talent and seen come through the rises of postgrad, and if they still feel you're an option, then they may give you some work.
So were you at the Royal Conservatory?
I was at the Royal College of Music in London, and I was there for 3 years postgrad. I got a scholarship to go there and study, which was great.
And is there an intimate connection with Covent Garden or with ENO?
I guess these colleges, they just have it's almost their unseen connections. I mean, all the 4 or 5 major conservatoires in London are, we get the heads of the opera houses coming to our productions, we get them sitting in on our master classes. Heads of department will always keep an eye on, oh, this guy's doing really well. Or this
so they get to know you because you're in the same city and you're at that level.
Yeah, I suppose like American singers as well. They have their American, you know your system. Yeah. You know who to keep in touch with.
Right.
The fun for me is also going outside of my box, coming to America, Asia, and experiencing the work here. So
I've got to ask you also, because you are from New Zealand, and you're from a Samoan family.
Yes.
I guess I don't know a lot of history, but how did the Samoans get to New Zealand? Is the Samoan community large in New Zealand?
It is quite large, actually. I think of all the countries, although America's, from what I've seen, there seems to be a huge Pacific Island population.
Quite a few. I'm just saying. I guess part of this, because I grew up in Oceanside, folks, which many of you know, and the Samoan community in Oceanside is huge. Because I think of the Marine base, and there were a lot of U.S. Marines who were from Samoa, from American Samoa, and then just ended up settling there.
I guess it's also the difference between Western Samoa and American Samoa, which are the 2 islands, or the 2 kind of divides. In a sense, we tend to get a lot of the Western Samoans emigrating to Australia, New Zealand, and a lot of the American Samoan, it's obviously immigrating to America. So,
I see.
That's not always the kind of the black and white way, but New Zealand is a very large community of Samoans, certainly in the North Island where the climate's warmer. For some reason, my family went to the bottom of the South Island, which is the coldest part of the country.
I remember it well.
You've been to New Zealand?
I have.
Cool.
When I was in Christchurch, and saw a Rigoletto
fantastic.
at the opera there.
The civic, whatever they're called.
Tiny little theater.
Tiny theater, yeah.
And a very interesting production, which we won't talk about.
Our houses in New Zealand look like nurseries in comparison to the American ones. These grown-up theaters around here, so
they're huge. Well, they were all built during the '60s, and there was a burgeoning time of regional opera and regional theater, and so I think they were overbuilt.
I also think they were multi-purpose. They kind of movie theaters. They kind of, it's almost like. Yeah, I mean, classical music in New Zealand, we have a very strong culture, but I wouldn't say we could get 3,500 people, each night. If you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Which is certainly the wonderful advantages of America and the big cities.
Yeah. Well, how did you start singing then in your family? Was it something that came natural to you? Did your family sing a lot?
We sang a lot. I started a church, which most Pacific Islanders do.
Right.
Whether or not you want to or not, you get dragged along there, and music was always there. I think there was an opportunity that my mum saw in a newspaper for a training for trebles, boy sopranos, the unbroken voice in my neighbourhood or in my city. And so I went along there. I'd already started piano lessons that my mum and dad had asked me to do. And so music was already part of the household. My sister sang. So I was a treble for 3 or 4 years, 5 services a week, every week of the year.
Wow. So this was high church.
Yeah, an Anglican tradition and a great choral tradition, which I think is where I learned my basic skills of learning music.
There is no better background, I don't think.
Particularly for guys. I mean, that if you start maybe a wee bit later, it's maybe a bit more difficult to get up to speed, but to be able to read music really quickly, to know styles, to know teamwork, ensemble, were great skills I didn't actually realize at the time until I got further into the business and realized that they were such invaluable assets.
Absolutely. And then you went to London from that background?
From singing, the director of music saw some potential, gave me a little scholarship for singing, took lessons locally, and that led to winning some national competitions eventually, not straight away, but eventually, and one of which was the eminent British mezzo-soprano Sarah Walker.
Oh, yes.
Who came to New Zealand to judge that competition. And although I didn't win the competition, I won enough kind of secondary prizes, one of which was to travel around the world and audition at some conservatoires.
Great.
I really wanted to go to London. I had contacts there, I had some friends that had been there. Singing in New Zealand is a hobby, so for someone thinking they could even sustain a career, it was, when I was young, a bit of a dream. Apart from Kiri Te Kanawa, no one else really did it that I was aware of. Now there seems to be so many young ones coming through and really doing their thing, and
that's so great.
Which is wonderful. So,
I mean, we always point to Kiri Te Kanawa as a wonderful example of someone who is essentially a Pacific Islander, Maori, who came up through the ranks and made an incredible international career. You're doing the same thing, which is really exciting, and then we see more and more Pacific Islanders coming up through the ranks.
I think the Pacific Islander community and the New Zealand community, Kiri really embraced me as a younger singer. She was the first person that in London, she has a house there, and invited me over and just made me feel welcome and knew how lonely it is away from your family.
How terrific.
And she's kind of kept an eye on me. I've done concerts for her, and I've gone to her for counsel and advice on various things. And she's always been really warm, so hopefully when I grow up as well that I can start to give, after this I go to do a New Zealand opera at the Arts Festival in New Zealand, lots of young Pacific Island singers, so
great.
Hopefully I can give a little bit back as well.
Wonderful. Well, it seems to me that then the role of Queequeg, who is himself a Pacific Islander, is written for you. Quite literally it was written for you, was it not, by Jake Heggie, the composer? How was that experience of having a role set on your voice and made to just match the color of the voice and the where the voice lies, and I mean, just having it personally manufactured for you?
Well, firstly, it was a real honour, and I must admit that talking to other colleagues, I think I was possibly one of the least kind of known to Jake in terms of on a one-to-one basis. I remember asking him after the premiere season, why me? Why did you choose me? And some of our mutual colleagues, Kiri in particular, as well as the pianist Malcolm Martineau, a great friend of Jake's.
Oh yes,
someone I've worked a lot with, had recommended me, as well as Patrick, that I could do this kind of role. I think the way he set it, particularly for the bass, this may be stereotypical, is kind of the soul of the piece. I've often seen it written as the moral compass of the piece. And I think it's kind of cool to have a lower voice, certainly the lower voice of any of the characters on stage, being the kind of the grounded, the kind of the earthly, I think, what is it, kind of the soft-spoken character, and in a sense he's the spiritual centre. Well, he
has the wisdom.
Yes,
also, I mean, and that's true of it.
I'm not saying all basses are wise. I'm just saying that just somehow that voice type and the way he sits the voice, which is in a nice kind of easy lower area,
right,
where you're not having to kind of grasp for it.
Well, and Queequeg
gives authority.
Queequeg, the character, is also the moral center, I think, of the book. There's, the things that he says are so wise. So I think it was pretty easy.
His relationship with Greenhorn, which is in a way this wonderful kind of parallel to the actual "we're going to get the whale" story.
Right.
I think that's what I really like. There are kind of subplots happening. And one of them, which is the very beginning of the opera, is these two very unlikely people getting together, even talking about Jonathan Boyd, who plays Greenhorn, just the most unlikely of a European, a Pacific Islander, heavily tattooed, shaven, spears, axes, harpoons, versus I suppose you just a traditional Western sailor. One is lost. One has his own identity. And just to look at the two of them side by side is just the most unlikely friendship.
Well, it's a wonderful contrast.
Which just turns into a really strong kind of parallel subplot for me.
Yeah.
So it's a real honor to play the role.
I love the arc. I saw it in Dallas, and I love the arc of their relationship from the beginning through to the end of the opera, as their closeness becomes more and more evident. It's really warm, and it's got such humanity in it, that relationship.
And I think
it's lovely.
I think Queequeg begins by giving that humanity to Greenhorn, and as the piece goes on, it becomes a shared and equal partnership, where I think maybe Greenhorn is searching for humanity or searching for answers. I'm not saying that Queequeg gives him those answers, but I feel his identity becomes stronger.
Yeah.
And his knowledge of himself, I'd like to think a little bit in part by his friendship with Queequeg. And I enjoy that kind of standoffish, that strangers who are unsure of each other at the beginning, to Queequeg's kind of demise in a way, where he asks his one friend, his only friend, I think is what Jake and Gina have written. And that for me is a very heartwarming moment.
Yeah. Now, this is the third time that you've done?
This is the third time I've done it, yes.
So you did it in Dallas, you did it in South Australia, and you're doing it here. And a number of the members of the cast are people who did it originally in Dallas.
Yes.
So there's a camaraderie there, I feel.
Ironically, the Greenhorn is the only one that hasn't done it. So it's actually this quite cool thing where the guy who's playing the guy who doesn't know how to sail is actually, well, if you look at Jonathan in real life, he's the only one who can sail. I think he's certified sailor.
Oh, really?
Or something. So,
oh, for God's sake.
But it's really cool having, as I said to you earlier, I feel like we're getting the band back together in a way. It's kind of this old friends coming together. Rehearsals are it's just a real pleasure.
Yeah, you seem to be having a lot of fun in the rehearsals.
We're doing work to our promise.
Yeah.
But I think it's the way the piece is written as well. It's an ensemble piece it's a very restricted piece in terms of we're all on the boat.
Right.
And so in some ways we grow together quicker. Maybe in other operas where you get to go somewhere else, if you know what I mean, but the fact is that all this happens on different parts of the boat, but all on this one kind of mass. And
in the middle of the ocean.
Exactly. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And in a way, as I think Lenny says, it's almost like rehearsals. We're here for a reason, even though we love seeing the area, but we're here for a reason. We all come to that place every day, 6 days a week, and make theatre and make drama. I think that's a really cool thing because we bond. For the first week there was just 7 of us on stage, well, 6 of us, but, and so there's no one else there. In some ways that's a really nice kind of feeling of a parallel of what the boat is, where
that's interesting. That
the irony is that everyone wants to get off this boat after the first, because I think Lenny says about 3 years you stay on the boat. Those were just searching
long expeditions.
If you think about that, that if people don't find a friend or someone to vent, or to even try and go to another place in order to keep sane, people are just going to jump off overboard. And I think we've found a really nice connection. We've all kept in touch since the original production, and
that's great.
It's a really special cast. So.
Cool. Well, it's interesting to think of every opera production as an obsession with finding the great white whale. That's sort of interesting. Except we like to think that here at San Diego Opera, we always win. At least the boat comes back. Thank you, John. I really appreciate you being with me.
Nice to speak to you.
We'll see you again.
Definitely. Cheers.